Comrades, this is Juan Marino of the Piquetero Party of Argentina speaking to you once again. First of all, let me say how deeply grateful we are for the opportunity to have taken part in the anti-NATO conference in Ankara, Turkish. It's an enormous joy for all of us to be able to continue this collaboration by participating in the summer camp of the Greek EEK. The comrades in Argentina celebrate the fact that we have been able to reestablish this bond after almost 2 decades. We were expelled from the Partido Obrero and the CRFI in 2010, and we trust that this collaboration will pave the way for the refundation of the Fourth International, or at the very least, bring clarity about our differences and make it possible to promote united anti-imperialist activities. On the eve of the Third World War, and while the United States restarts for the fourth time its imperialist war against Iran, we revolutionaries all over the world must prepare ourselves for the historic battle by giving priority to the strength of what unites us, avoiding the temptation of national retreat with the program as an excuse. At a moment when the imperial enemies are coming for everything and for everyone, let us swear an oath today that will give us peace for having fulfilled our obligations as internationalist militants. Down with the imperialisms. War on war. We win together or we die together. Long live the CRFI and the Fourth International. For this camp, we agreed with Sabas to prepare some words on Bolivia, Cuba, and Latin America, but we have decided to transform them into a presentation on the American question, or the Americas, as the Yankees or gringos now call it, the derogatory names we Latinos use for the imperialists of the United States. A colorful aside, popular memory links gringo to the Spanish pronunciation of green go, that is, the demand that the Greens, the Yankee soldiers, get out of our countries, and associates it with Yankees go home, that they go back to their own house and that the constant invasions by the United States come to an end. Their founding fathers were our invading fathers. Returning to the American question, the difference between singular and plural, America versus the Americas, is not merely grammatical but eminently political. Trying to understand Latin America without its imperial reverse side in the United States is trying to understand the semi-colonies apart from the situation of the imperial metropolises. It is trying to see the totality while covering one eye with our hand. We have held an extensive cadre school of almost 4 hours against Greater North America to recover the memory of this infamous colonial history and to denounce the new US plan of war, invasions, and annexations over the whole of our America. We invite those of you who speak Spanish to watch it, and we will subtitle it in English so as to share it with you shortly. The linguistic combat runs through our entire history like a scar that will not close. The very word Latin America was appropriated and instrumentalized by French propaganda to present France as the natural head of the Latin race, and thereby justify the French invasions of Mexico 1862-1867 under Napoleon III. The objective was to dilute the Hispanic or Ibero-American character, in reference to Spain and Portugal, of almost the whole of South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, granting a cultural overrepresentation to the French colonial enclaves on the islands and coasts of the Caribbean. On the contrary, our continental independence was also born in war against France. While the first successful American Revolution was that of the United States in 1776, and it counted on French support against England, the truth is that the first successful Latin American Revolution took place in Haiti and against France. It began in 1791 and declared its independence in 1804. This emancipatory epic of enslaved Africans, together with mulattoes and free blacks, began 2 decades before the first May revolutions against Spain on May 25, 1809 in Chuquisaca and May 25, 1810 in Buenos Aires, long before Bolivia and Argentina even existed as countries. All of this happened against the French Revolution, which was fiercely anti-monarchical but deeply ambiguous when it came to real equality. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, or l'amour, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death, but only among bourgeois, males, whites, slaveholders, and colonialists. The silenced voices of the conspiracy of the equals of 1796, led by the proto-communist revolutionaries Gracchus Babov, Filippo Buonarroti, and Sylvain Marechal, amongst others, were the counterpart within the French metropolis of the colonial resistance of Haiti, led by Toussaint Louverture. The same can be said of the precursor of feminism, Olympe de Gougois, who in 1791, while the French Constitution was being debated, published her Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen, written as a direct paraphrase, article by article, of the 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. In 1793, she was guillotined, immortalizing this phrase: if woman has the right to mount the scaffold, she must equally be recognized the right to mount the tribune. That none of them championed the Haitian Revolution, not even those who wrote manifestos demanding the community of goods, or plays denouncing the enslavement of black people. This is the incontestable proof of how difficult it is, even among their most lucid, honest, and humane sectors, to understand the colonial revolution from within the metropolises. The Latin American bourgeois democratic revolution, therefore, was not subsidiary to the French one, nor its mere colonial complement. It ran parallel to it, overflowed it, and outlived it, extending beyond the Emperor Napoleon and the Bourbon Restoration of the Ancien Regime, 1814-1815. And its first link, the Haitian Uprising of 1791, revealed from the very start the class limits of the Metropolitan Revolution. It broke out without the Jacobins, and before them, the French Revolution came in 1789, but the Jacobins only took power in 1793 with monarchical rhetoric, because the revolutionary colonial assemblies were the organs of the local slaveholding class, and it had to fight for a freedom that no French political fraction granted of its own initiative. The abolition of slavery applied to all the French colonies and declared all men, without distinction of color, French citizens with full constitutional rights. Something so human and yet so remote from the French bourgeoisie, even from its Jacobin left wing. The Jacobins were not abolitionists of the first hour. They abolished slavery only in 1794, half a decade after the start of the French Revolution. And they did so only when they had no other choice. That is, when they were pressed by the armed insurrection of the slaves themselves in the colonies. The decree was voted after the arrival of a delegation from Saint-Domingue that included Jean-Baptiste Bellet, a former slave who had managed to purchase his own freedom and who became the first black deputy in French history. It is worth clarifying that Saint-Domingue was the western part of the island, what is today Haiti, a name that comes from the Taino name of the island, Haiti, land of mountains. The island as a whole was called La Española, Hispaniola. The Spanish part to the east was called Santo Domingo, today the Dominican Republic, and the French colony to the west, Saint-Domingue, which is the same name in French. And for that very reason, the Bourgeois Convention ratified the abolition of slavery, because it needed the support of its colonies against England and Spain, its imperialist rivals in the Caribbean. That is to say, they did it not only against their own explicitly slaveholding will, but as a concession made under a pressing necessity of war. Here, the class struggle and the anti-imperialist struggle appear with full clarity within the bourgeois revolution itself, and within the inter-imperialist war for the division of the colonies. Emancipation did not descend from enlightened Paris down to its colonies. On the contrary, it was the slaves' cry of freedom that rose up from the colonies until it enlightened the slave-holding metropolis, under penalty of death at the hands of friend or foe. The Haitians, in return, not only took Republican universalism and carried it to where most of the Jacobins had never wanted to go. They also upheld it with arms in hand when Napoleon restored slavery in 1802 and tried to enslave them once again. In order to invade its former slaves, the French metropolis first made peace with its slave-holding peers in England. As long as the inter-imperialist war lasted, the French fleet could never have reached the Caribbean with dozens of ships and more than 20,000 men. Napoleon needed peace in order to restore the colonial order, and the English did not merely let him through. They looked upon the expedition with favor, because a state of victorious former slaves seemed to them a terrible example for their own colonies, beginning with Jamaica. The result was the victory of the insurgents over Napoleon and the declaration of Haiti's independence in 1804. The Haitian Revolution was the only slave rebellion in history that triumphed and founded an independent state, one, moreover, that abolished slavery immediately. In Haiti, Spartacus defeated Rome. As can be seen, historical reality was very different from the Jacobin mythology, perpetuated in the world left to this very day by Jacobin magazine. Even the book by Cyril Lionel Robert James, that inspires the magazine's logo, and which understood better than anyone the autonomy of the Haitian Revolution, could not break out of the French symbolic frame. It is not that in Haiti they were more Jacobin than the Jacobins. It was quite literally a revolution of another class. The French Revolution was metropolitan and bourgeois, while the Haitian Revolution was colonial and belonged to its slaves. We must reestablish the historical truth, decolonize our imagination, and put an end to the Jacobin, that is, bourgeois, metropolitan, and French tutelage. The linguistic and semiotic combat we propose is therefore an acute expression of the struggle of the exploited and the oppressed to force their way through the narrow margins of the bourgeois revolution per excellence, that is, the French Revolution, and its favorite enlightened offspring, the Jacobins. We are not the black Jacobins, nor the proletarian Jacobins, in Lenin's phrase. Even the colonial Republican governor, Lavieux, referred to Toussaint Louverture as that black Spartacus, the man foretold by Raynal who would avenge the outrages committed against his race. We were the colonial masses who make no history, and they were the enlightened vanguard, the children of the revolution being tragically devoured by Saturn, as the Girondin bourgeois is said to have put it on his way to the guillotine. For the enlightened French, it was inconceivable that black slaves could be the protagonists of their own story, if they would not even recognize their humanity juridically by abolishing slavery, much less were they going to recognize in the slaves of a remote Caribbean colony the subjective power to change the course of universal history. First, because that was directly incompatible with the interests of their slaveholding class, but also because there was an outright theoretical incapacity. It is not that the enlightened ones were dazzled by the beauty of their own narcissistic light. Those who were staring from the summit of the world in a revolution in Paris could never have understood the revolution of the slaves, even if it had happened right in front of their noses. Michel Rolph Trollot explains this in his book Silencing the Past, Power and the Production of History from 1995, where he speaks of the Haitian Revolution as unthinkable history even as it was happening. That is why contemporaries, faced with the evidence of the slave insurrection, explained it by anything except its protagonists. Outside agitators, royalist conspiracies, manipulation by the mulattoes, abolitionist instigation. The enemies of the masses said the very same thing a century later against the Russian Bolsheviks, that the founding revolution of the second independent state of America should have been A historiographical non-event is, for Trolla, the perfect demonstration of how power produces silence. The Haitians were the protagonists of a history that the West could not think, and later did not want to tell, because it forced the West to confront its own slaveholding and colonial past. Saint Domingue, Haiti, was the richest colony in the world and the engine of Atlantic commerce. The Pearl of the Antilles was one of the main sources of French bourgeois enrichment. The colony produced nearly half of the sugar and coffee of the Atlantic world. That is why the Haitian Revolution did not break out on the margins of the world market or on its periphery, another detestable term, but in the extractive heart of the French colonial world. It is true that without the existence of the modern industrial proletariat, one could not yet conceive in that era of a philosophy of universal history, with the exploited and the oppressed as its protagonists, historical materialism, let alone of the materialist dialectic. The materialism of the French Enlightenment was mechanical, not dialectical, as Marx pointed out in The Holy Family, and much less of a political theory of the world revolution, that is, the permanent revolution. But we can affirm that those theoretical truths which were revealed to the French revolutionaries already existed in act, taking root among the slaves of Haiti. The revolution does not spring forth whole and fully armed, like Athena from the head of a couple of enlightened men who, in their apotheotic arrogance, imagine that regicide transforms them into gods like Zeus. The revolution is born, and born again with each new generation, in dispersed, chaotic form, and under mysterious and unsuspected configurations, until that moment unknown to everyone. It is the unlettered peoples who, through their collective resistance and violence against the prevailing laws, achieve the impossible. The chaos that generates a new order, unthinkable until then, and breathe creativity and life into their own revolution. Only afterwards, when the creature has already been born and everything really important has already happened, do certain intellectuals arrive, always late, to discover, not invent or decree, what the ignorant peoples have already made real. The revolution grows from the ground up, and it is born claiming its human sovereignty over the laws of the earth and of heaven, of the state and of the history written by the exploiters. The revolution is born of exploitation and oppression, not of the Enlightenment. The revolution is an archetype of a humanity that refuses to die while alive and that wants to live this life, not the next one, in freedom. The revolution is not a storm, a destructive force of nature, but an indomitable cry of freedom, a promise of human fraternity. The revolution is born, therefore, organically, from the vital instinct of the masses, and not from a truth revealed to a chosen few, the hierophants of the revolution. That is why the Haitians were the permanent revolution, and the master slave dialectic avant la lettre, if you will allow me the expression in French. We Latin American revolutionaries, by contrast, enjoy better material conditions, in the Marxist sense of human, collective, revolutionary, and emancipatory praxis, for connecting the particular with the universal, because we are the direct heirs of the colonial revolution. We are the mestizos, criollos, slaves, and indigenous peoples, together with Tupac Amaru II, cacique of Cusco in present day Peru, and Tupac Katari, Aymara leader of Upper Peru, present day Bolivia. We are the result of an insurrectionary wave in 1780 1781 that shook the Andes and found its continuity in the Haitian Revolution. We are the children of the greatest native peoples rebellion of colonial America and one of the greatest slave revolts in history, not a transatlantic copy of Robespierre. We are not the colonial mirror of the bourgeoisie, but its future grave diggers, together with the exploited and oppressed of the metropolises. Neither copy nor imitation, but heroic creation, said Mariátegui. There is a powerful popular myth according to which Katari, facing his martyrdom, said with prophetic certainty, I will return, and I will be millions. And so it was. The example of Haiti ran through the whole of our America, and the masters gave it a name, Haitianism, the specter that saw behind every conspiracy of the slaves. If communism was the specter haunting Europe in 1848, Haitianism was the specter that haunted the Caribbean a couple of decades earlier. Specific cases: Tula's rebellion in Curaçao, 1795, which invoked what had happened in Saint Domingue. That of José Leonardo Chirino in Coro, Venezuela, 1795, inspired by the law of the French. The Aponte conspiracy in Cuba, 1812. The Denmark-Vesey conspiracy in Charleston, 1822, which expected Haitian help. And the German coast uprising in Louisiana, 1811, the largest slave revolt in the history of the United States, with leaders linked to Saint Domingue. And there was one chapter that deserves special mention. In 1816, the Haitian president Pétion gave refuge, weapons, and ships to Bolivar in exchange for the promise to abolish slavery in the territories he liberated. Haiti was not only an example, it was a base of operations for South American independence. The permanent revolution, therefore, seen from our America, is not about being the left wing or the far left or the complements of the bourgeois metropolitan revolution, but about opposing to it and in unity on a world scale the colonial, proletarian, peasant, indigenous, ethnic, and feminist revolution against all bourgeois imperialist oppression. The formula of monarchical succession is not our motto. Le roi is mort, vive le roi, the king is dead, long live the king. We colonial peoples do not need to exchange one king for another, or a new king disguised as an emperor, as a constitutional monarchy, as a republic, or even as socialism. But to put an end to the monarchies, the masters, the theocracies, and the imperialisms, not in order to impose our egalitarian utopia on every country, but so that each people, when it is ready, in its own time and in its own way, may fully exercise its popular sovereignty. In fact, I opened this very presentation by championing the anti imperialist war of a theocratic, Islamic, anti feminist, anti communist, and undoubtedly capitalist Iran against the very democratic, republican, enlightened, and Frenchified United States. The refounded Fourth International will be the anti imperialist unity of all the peoples exploited and oppressed of the entire world. Of course, we know very well that Free Haiti gave itself monarchical forms. Dessalines proclaimed himself emperor in 1804, Christophe crowned himself king in the north in 1811, hereditary nobility included. The Republic, Pétions in the south, was only one of the country's two political traditions. And we know that under Toussaint, the constitution of 1801, and later under Dessalines and Christophe, a system of forced agrarian labor inherited from Sonthonax and Polverel remained in force. The cultivators were legally free and waged, but bound to the plantations under military discipline in order to sustain the export economy. Our Haitianism does not seek to embellish the colonial revolution or to deny the conservative aspects it had, as every real revolution has. That is, every revolution that it is born partly reflecting the very world it came to change. What we do is to continue, by theoretical means, the emancipatory rebellions that the term Latin seeks to conceal. The same happens with the terms Pan American and the Americas, presenting the American revolutions as the homogeneous fruits of a Pan Americanist continental spirit was always a false mythological origin history, spread by the wolf in sheep's clothing of the Yankees. In this regard, it is worth recalling that, according to later research, The Invention of Latin America, an article in the American Historical Review, 2013, the first documented uses of the term come from Spanish American intellectuals. The Chilean Francisco Bilbao used Latin America and the Latin American race in his speech Iniciativa del América, Paris, June 22, 1856. And the Colombian José María Torres Caicedo wrote in September 1856 the poem Las dos Américas, the two Americas. The race of Latin America faces the Saxon race. The one who coined them, therefore, was not France, which later misappropriated it, but the resistance of the Hispanic peoples against the United States, in particular against the recognition by US President Pierce of the filibuster regime of William Walker in Nicaragua, 1856, who planned to establish a slave-holding empire in Central America. Filibuster here is not an insult, but a full-length portrait. The filibusters were the Anglo-Saxon pirates who, inspired by the supremacist doctrine of manifest destiny, organized private military expeditions without the authorization of any government and sought to create new slave states to add to the Union or to found personal empires. In other words, the term Latin America was born as an anti-imperialist concept against Anglo-Saxon US expansion. Latin America, then, is a term indulgent toward French colonialism, and one that takes the leading role away from the colonial rebellions of Africans and native peoples. If it has won popular legitimacy today, it is in repudiation of the Anglos, that is, of the annexationism of the United States and the English invasions. Let us remember that Argentina had to resist English invasions not only in the Malvinas War, 1982, but even before being Argentina. The English invasions took place in 1806 and 1807, while our independence was declared only on July 9, 1816. That is, 10 years before being Argentina. We were already fighting the English. When we say, long live Latin America, then we are saying, out with Anglo-Saxon imperialism, out with the United States and England from our America. How could we then forget this history of emancipatory struggle and content ourselves with the Yankees adding an S and saying in the plural, the Americas? This is a late formulation of the 20th century, the evolution of the earlier term Pan-American, widespread in diplomatic circles, or of the even worse and detestable American, which identifies the whole hemisphere as an extension of the United States, that is, as its backyard. As against this dehistoricizing pretension that seeks to flatten symbolically and geographically the diversity of our America, the plural in the Americas implies a mutual recognition in the difference between Latin America and Anglo-Saxon America, and raises a partial linguistic barrier against the imperial steamroller. And yet the Anglos always carry the knife hidden under the poncho, as we gauchos in Argentina say. The Americas repeats the binary Anglo versus Latino approach, which has many virtues, but in its continentalist ambitions, it is the ideological reverse and complement of Greater North America. That is, it amounts to a formal recognition of the relative autonomy of South America at the expense of all the rest of Latin America, and to an agreement to hand North America over to Anglo-Zionist imperialism. We ask, since when are there only Latinos in South America and only Anglos in North America? This self-serving binarism does not withstand the slightest analysis. In the first place, because North America itself contains within it at least 6 North Americas. It is a mixture of the white Anglophone United States, overrepresented, with Hispanic Mexico, which used to be called the Viceroyalty of New Spain, bilingual Canada, Anglophone but also Francophone, Greenland, which is Nordic through Denmark and Inuit through its native peoples, the Afro-American United States, and of course the indigenous peoples of North America themselves, who have nothing Anglo about them. WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant North America, is therefore pure imperial and genocidal mythology. In the second place, because this binarism seeks to erase a third party that demolishes the imperial narrative. We are referring to Central America. We highlight in this regard the position of the comrades of El Socialista Centroamericano, who advance a great slogan for the reunification of the Central America homeland, in allusion to the United Provinces of Central America, the counterpart of the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata, and to the Federal Republic or Federation of Central America. The unity of Central America, therefore, is a great alternative historical perspective that must be recovered in order to dig trenches and halt the advance of Greater North America. We Argentines will never forget Central America because from the southernmost country of America, we share with them the sky blue and white of many of their flags, as a symbol of unity and fraternity with the flag of the Rio de la Plata. The Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío himself dedicated a poem, Canto a la Argentina, in praise of the voyage of the frigate La Argentina, which set sail from the waters of the Rio de la Plata with the two-colored flag on its gallant mast. Bouchard's attacks on the Spanish strongholds along the Pacific coast, especially in Guatemala and Nicaragua, generated a wave of enthusiasm for the privateers who come from Buenos Aires. The year after Bouchard's battles, a new wave of Argentine privateers arrived on the Central American coasts, this time led by the French commander Louis Michel Horry, who also raised the flag of the Rio de la Plata over the Spanish fortifications in Guatemala. And so it was that when the United Provinces of Central America, soon to become the Federal Republic of Central America, comprising Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, were proclaimed in 1823, the Salvadoran patriot Manuel José Arce thought of the sky blue and white for its flag. Let us add one colorful aside. Bouchard's campaign was so American that the sky blue and white came to fly even over California itself from November 24 to 29, 1818, when it still was Hispanic territory. An epic moment, comparable to the blockade of Manila in 1818, the flag of the Rio de la Plata harassing for weeks the approaches to the capital of Asian Spain. John Paul Jones landing in England itself. Artigas' privateers fighting in Spanish waters off the Canary Islands. The Chilean boats seizing the Spanish flagship Esmeralda under the guns of the fortress of Callao, the military heart of Spanish power in America. Canaries' fire ships destroying the Ottoman admiral's flagship in the midst of the Greek War of Independence, or the flag of the Vietnamese NLF flying over the Independence Palace in Saigon in 1975. That is to say, the sky blue and white is bound by its emancipatory history in brotherhood with the flags of all the insurgent peoples who struck back within the very dominions of the empires. In the third place, because the Anglophone Caribbean exists. There are 12 independent countries, adding Guyana and Belize on the mainland, 5 British territories and the US Virgin Islands, which must advance toward the regional unity of the Caribbean in order to put an end to the colonial vestiges, not to mention Puerto Rico, which is the oldest colony in the world since 1493, and to this day still fights for its independence from the United States. There are therefore Latinos in North America, Mexico, Francophone Canada, and a growing migrant Latino population within the United States itself, and there are Anglophones in the Caribbean. There is also the Dutch-speaking Caribbean, Suriname, independent since 1975, and the territories that remain under the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Curaçao, Aruba, Sint Maarten, Bonaire. How would these countries fit into the Latino scheme? Finally, as Secretary of War Pete Hegseth put it, Greater North America is a plan of wars, invasions, and annexations, stretching from Greenland down to the equator. That is, it replicates the threat of Greater Israel over the entire Middle East, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Taking up once again the logic of the Second World War, the United States assigns itself quarter-sphere defense as its immediate security perimeter, and within the zone geographically bounded by the Andes mountain range and the Amazon, it seeks to transform the local armies into armies of occupation, directed against their own peoples and placed at the service of the empire. Let me add, they do not say South America as the boundary, because the countries of the Caribbean coastal zone would also fall within their delirious perimeter. Hence Trump's insistence on turning Venezuela into the 51st state. It is not merely an extravagant expression or a personal madness. It is an imperial plan, declared in writing and already underway. The Shield of the Americas is then the complement of Greater North America. On March 7, 2026, at the Trump National Doral Hotel in Miami, Trump signed before 12 Latin American presidents, the proclamation that launched this continental military coalition, designed by Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, and which today numbers 17 countries, Argentina among them. Point 3 of the proclamation itself states that the United States will train and mobilize the armies of the partner countries. Hegseth celebrated the US military incursions in Guatemala and Ecuador, carried out in the framework of the Shield of the Americas, as an incredible reinforcement of the Monroe Doctrine in order to recover control of our hemisphere, while Trump announced at the same summit that Cuba is in its final moments and celebrated the genocidal blockade. We also ask ourselves what will happen to French Guiana, which remains to this day a French overseas territory, the living example of French colonialism in our America. Will it be spared for being Latin, or will it be another military target for Trump? And will the same happen with Guadeloupe and Martinique? We are in a position, therefore, to set ourselves a higher historical horizon in order to break with the complementary binarism between the mythological Anglo-Saxon North America and the Frenchified Latin America, which does exist, but which is, above all, Ibero-American. The overwhelming specific weight of Brazil across the whole of South America should suffice to prove it. We reject the self-serving Latino versus Anglo binarism because its two terms are the two sides of the same coin which, above all, deny the regional independence of the Central America homeland and the diversity of the Caribbean. What is at stake, on the contrary, is to put an end to the false Anglo-Saxon hegemony of the United States over North America and to issue a call for the American unity of Canada and Greenland with their Latin brothers and sisters, with Mexico as the natural nexus for articulating a great continental alliance. The Patria Grande of the American continent, the great homeland of the Americas, will put an end to the anachronistic hegemony of the United States over the whole of our America, will recognize the full autonomy of the Central American homeland from Guatemala to Nicaragua, adding Panama and Belize, and will complete the unfinished independence struggles of all the countries and territories of the Caribbean, beginning with Puerto Rico. In this way, the Patria Grande of the American continent will recognize the autonomy and regional integration of the regional and national patrias chicas, the little homelands, and will uphold unity in diversity against the extracontinental powers, that is, against all the European imperialisms and, in particular, starting by expelling Anglo-Saxon imperialism. It is with these positions of American unity and continental anti-imperialism that we extend the proposal to convene in our America, following the example of the Christian Rakowski International Socialist Center, an American Continental Anti-NATO Conference. We could convene a first meeting with all of us, Latin America and US comrades, who took part in the Ankara conference, and on the basis of the agreements we are able to reach, launch an open call to the entire continent, from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, Antarctica, and the South Atlantic Islands, that is, the Argentine Malvinas. The objective, in our opinion, will be to build a continental anti-imperialist tribune, where all fighters can take the floor, on the condition that they then replicate the event in their own countries and contribute to organizing united rallies for the dissolution of NATO against Greater North America and the Shield of the Americas, in support of Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, the Sahel, Russia, and China, and for the resignation of all pro-war presidents who endanger Latin America as a zone of peace. And what about the Socialist United States of Latin America? You may perhaps ask us. We uphold that slogan in opposition to the sepoy servility of the native bourgeoisies who prefer the empires to their own peoples. As Trotskyists, we stand for putting forward the working class and its parties as the alternative national caudillo, in the struggle for national liberation. That said, and following Trotsky, this socialist perspective cannot be mechanically contraposed to national liberation. If this presentation is good for anything, it is to show that there exists an enormous history of struggles for independence, and that those struggles remain alive, with a national bourgeoisie and without one. Therefore, the AUF, Anti-Imperialist United Front, must not be understood as a propaganda device for better attacking bourgeois nationalism, but as the fundamental common ground on which we call for a united historic action to defeat the imperialists. If we call for an AUF, it is not to denounce allies, but to defeat the enemies we have in common. That is why, for us, Trotskyists of national liberation, the AUF is the tactic of the permanent revolution. We do not unilaterally counterpose the socialist revolution as a national obstacle to unity in the anti-imperialist struggle. On the contrary, we raise the international socialist revolution as the banner of world unity between the colonial revolution and the proletarian revolution in the metropolises. The example of the Communist Party of China, its anti-Japanese United Front, and its more than 30 years of civil war against the bourgeois nationalist party until the socialist victory in 1949 is conclusive evidence. China is the school where the Leninist AUF, not its Menshevik caricature, and our anti-imperialist conception of the permanent revolution came together. Another colorful aside. The founder of National Liberation Trotskyism, Liborio Justo, called South America unity Andilla, in reference to the Andes mountain range. Che Guevara drew on the same inspiration when he argued that the Continental Revolution would have the Andes as its Sierra Maestra. We pay our homage, then, to those who militated before us and who, with their example and their ideas, inspire us to carry on their struggle. The historical superiority of Trotskyism over Maoism, Stalinism, and Guevarism, therefore, will not be determined by counterposing a pure and abstract socialism to bourgeois nationalism, but by being the current that best expresses the organic unity of the anti-imperialist militancy of the colonies with the proletarian internationalism of the metropolises. We are the permanent revolution. We are the revolution within the revolution. We are the world unity of the proletariat, national liberation, and the anti-bureaucratic rebellions. We are the Fourth International. For that very reason, we must open our arms, without sectarianism, and we call on Maoists, Stalinists, Guevarists, bourgeois nationalists, militia members, guerrilla fighters and patriotic soldiers, workers, peasants, native peoples, students, the feminist movements, the anti-patriarchal dissidencies, progressives, pacifists, slum priests, and all fighters to unite with us against imperialism. The Popular Assembly of 1971 and the Bolivian FRA, Revolutionary Anti-Imperialist Front, Frente Revolucionario Antiimperialista, confirmed to us that this is the road of our America. As Che Guevara said in his message to the Argentines, and I quote, "It is all part of a single struggle. And it is true when imperialism calls it by a common denominator. Because even when ideologies change, even when one calls oneself a communist, or a socialist, a Peronist, or any other political ideology in a given country, there are only two positions in history. One is either in favor of the monopolies, or one is against the monopolies. And to all those who are against the monopolies, a common denominator can be applied. In that, the North Americans are right. All of us who fight for the liberation of our peoples are fighting at the same time, even if we sometimes do not know it, for the annihilation of imperialism. And we are all allies, even if we sometimes do not know it, even if we sometimes divide our own forces in internal quarrels, even if by sterile disputes we sometimes fail to build the front necessary to fight against imperialism. But all of us who fight honestly for the liberation of our respective homelands, are direct enemies of imperialism. May 25, 1962. We consider then that we have set out with sufficient clarity our positions on the American question and the historical, theoretical, programmatic, and even cultural foundations that we propose for convening an American continental anti-NATO conference. If this online conference and this united campaign in each country proves successful, we will have laid solid militant foundations for a permanent continental articulation, and we will be able to advance toward the constitution of a continental counterpart of the Christian Rakowski Center, which, as Sabas explained to us, is a center founded to unite all internationalists of all political currents in the struggle against the imperialist wars. Should such an ambitious objective be achieved, we put forward in advance our proposal that its name be the Liborio Justo Socialist Center of the Continental American Patria Grande, to affirm its fourth internationalist, Americanist, and national liberation character. Comrades of the EEK, the history of our America calls out to us, and we hope it calls out to you as well. Let us say together, loud and clear, patria o muerte, homeland or death. We shall win, hasta la victoria siempre, until victory always. We wish you every success in your camp, and we will see you in the struggle.